Snapchat for Andover High School. Somebody got in trouble for putting something on Snapchat. So you had an increased police presence at Andover, and same deal in Pembroke. Out in Pembroke, there was another social media post. So I got to tell you, we work in that newsroom in Boston too for WBZ, and it's every single day there seems to be a school threat now. So get your head around that one. I don't remember as many of those when I was in high school, but I guess it's a different world now. On a lighter note, we have a Red Sox opening day on Thursday. There you go. Take me out to the ball game. Let's cue it up somewhere. Take me out to the ball game. No, Red Sox Rays Thursday in St. Petersburg's. Red Sox opening under the dome in St. Petersburg, Florida. First, the Rays, AL East rival. Good thing that they are opening in Tampa, because I don't think Fenway Park is quite ready for baseball, as I look out and see snow still lingering on the ground here in Newburyport. But Sox open on the road. Very exciting. They released their opening pitching rotation, which is cool. We got that today. We get no surprise. Chris Sale going to be your ace, number 1, followed by David Price, then Rick Porcello. Hector Velasquez going to be the number 4 starter, and Brian Johnson, number 5. You may have heard the knuckleballer there. David Wright is he is actually on the DL right now. David Wright is, so he seems to be getting a little bit more injury prone here. Guy's hurt a lot, that knuckleballer, but. Anyway, we get that's the Sox opening day roster. I believe it's a 4:10 start, I think, Thursday afternoon. So gotta love afternoon baseball. 4:10. It will be the Red Sox and Rays from St. Petersburg, Florida. So get ready for that. Very, very exciting. Bruins in Winnipeg tonight. Bruins continue to cruise. Lost a overtime game, maybe 2 last week, but they battled through all these injuries, and they're just 1 point out of first place now, coming off a big overtime win the other night with Brad Marchand's game-winning goal. So Bruins are absolutely cruising. They may actually win the Eastern Conference, which is something else. Never would have guessed that at the beginning of the year. You thought it was going to be a bit of a rebuilding year, but the Bruins just absolutely on fire. They are going to be fun to watch as we go to the playoffs. They actually clinched a playoff spot last week, so congratulations to the Boston Bruins. And the Celtics keep winning as well. And again, I think it's 4 in a row now after their win last night in Phoenix. This little road swing for the C's, but no Kyrie Irving, bunch of injuries. They've just battled through over the last few weeks, and it looks like they're not even going to have Kyrie for the beginning of the playoffs. So we'll see if they can keep winning without their stars, but Celtics cruising as well. And maybe the best sports story in recent months on the national level is that out of Loyola Chicago, the team, the small school team, now headed to the Final Four. It's an unbelievable story. Loyola Chicago, even the biggest NCAA basketball fans did not have Loyola Chicago even winning a game. Maybe they did, but they certainly, very few of them had the Loyola Chicago Ramblers going to the Final Four. It is a story of small school, Cinderella story, just making an unbelievable run, an 11 seed, and now they go against Big Ten powerhouse Michigan in the Final Four Saturday night. And of course, Sister Jean, the team chaplain, says the prayers for the team before the game, has been interviewed all over the place, to the point where I've actually took a little heat this week for saying I am a little bit sick of Sister Jean, not because of her, but the media. They keep putting her on every time there's a win or a good moment. There's Sister Jean. It's a great story, but maybe a little much at times. But Sister Jean and Loyola Chicago going to the Final Four Saturday night. Really 2 good matchups. It'll be amazing. Michigan is really good. It'll be really hard for me to envision Loyola Chicago getting by Michigan. I think that 11 seed luck might run out on Saturday, but we'll see. That should be a great game. And then Kansas and Duke this weekend was a great game. Kansas advancing to the Final Four. First Big East powerhouse, Villanova, a team. I'm not sure if I mentioned this on the show. I'm a Big East fan. I'm a Providence guy. Providence Friars fan, and we went down to the Big East tournament on a whim to go see Providence play Villanova on the Saturday night of the Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden. Providence had a chance to win it down the stretch at the buzzer. They didn't do it, and the Villanova was just so impressive. Every time it seemed like Providence could pull off the shocker. Villanova just stood strong, and then in overtime they ran away with it by 10. It was a great basketball game though to watch, but but Villanova, as good as it gets. We'll see who ends up taking the Final Four. I know my bracket is busted. I'm sure yours is too. If it's not, I don't know. I'll ask some questions about the brackets next year. We will see. But on the weather front, spring just about here. You can feel it in the air. Opening day Thursday. Very excited about that. We are getting there, folks. It should be here. Well, I don't know. The warm weather really should be here soon. I think it has to be, right? Who knows? But again, folks, follow us at Joppa Afternoons on Twitter. That is at Joppa Afternoons on Twitter. We're going to bring in Mike Morris here in a few. I just saw Lily Dissette, one of our afternoon producers, also in the house today. We're kind of picking up the slack again for David Kramer, who is on vacation on the TV side. So we got us covered here still. Again, Mike Moore is going to join us. We'll talk a lot about all these storms that have happened, the Plum Island issues. He's been following it all winter, and we'll do that when we get back. So should be an exciting show here in just a moment. Again, my name is Drew Moholland. It is Afternoon Drive. We kind of recap the winter and the storms with Mike Morris in just a moment, and should be a lot of fun. We'll get ready for spring too at some point, so we'll ask Mike some questions about that. So keep it here. This is Afternoon Drive on Joppa Radio.
Baby, do you want to do the dance with me? Baby, do you want to do the dance? Well, step right on out. Don't show any doubt. I can't wait for the next refrain. I'll bet that you know some steps I don't know. I'll bet that you know their names. Baby, do you want to do the dance with me? Baby, do you want to do the dance? Baby, do you want to do the dance with me? Baby, do you want to do the dance? Well, gal, you look sweet. Get up on your feet. Let me walk you across the room. Don't say you don't know how. Show me now. The music always ends too soon. Baby, do you want to do the dance with me? Baby, do you want to do the dance? Baby, do you want to do the dance with me? Baby, do you want to do the dance? Baby, veux-tu faire la danse avec moi? Baby, veux-tu faire la danse? Baby, veux-tu faire la danse avec moi? Baby, veux-tu faire la danse? Baby, do you want to do the dance with me? Baby, do you want to do the dance? Baby, do you want to do the dance with me? Baby, do you want to do the dance? Baby, do you want to do the dance with me? Baby, do you want to do the dance? Baby, do you want to do the dance with me? Baby, do you want to do the dance? Baby, do you want to do the dance with me? Baby, do you want to do the dance? Baby, do you want to do the dance with me? Baby, do you want to do the dance?
All right, welcome on back to Afternoon Drive here on Joppa Radio. Thank you for starting our Tuesday afternoon off with us here. My name is Drew Moholland, and I am pleased to bring in a return guest here for the second time, Mike Morris, the chairman of the group Storm Surge and the member of the Newburyport Flood Resiliency Committee. Mike, good to have you back. How are you? How you been?
Great. Just got back from a trip to the Caribbean, so I can't be too bad.
Yeah, you know what? To end winter, let's start there. Where'd you go? How was the trip? You look refreshed. Very good to see you.
Sure, I went to Barbados, caught some waves that were generated by some of the storms you guys had up here.
Yep.
And had a good time with my son, who was on spring break.
That's nice. That's a better way to handle the storms, I think. You'd take that side of the
Yeah, hop on a plane. It's like flipping a switch and walking into another room.
And you guys, I remember last time, both you and your son surfers, right?
Yes.
So when you say catching waves, you were literally catching waves
Literally
out there.
catching waves.
How was the surfing?
Surfing was good. Yeah, it was, but it fluctuated between waist high to chest high to sometimes 3 or 4 feet overhead, so there were waves down there.
Nice, because is it when you travel from here for like a vacation in the wintertime, are you like out of your prime? Is it like rusty, or is it like riding a bike?
Well, yeah, you're sort of out of your prime, right? I mean, back in the old days when I had younger bones, I'd surf a lot through the winter.
Yeah.
But especially since I've been going to the tropics a lot, I find it really hard to get into 38-degree water sometimes.
Although everybody I talk to that does surf says like you can pretty much do it like all year round with the suits they have now, right?
Oh yeah, they're a whole lot better than when I was 18 years old. I mean, we had these dive suits that leaked, and they were really stiff and hard to paddle in. Of course, back then I didn't know any better, so I just figured that's how it was. You were always cold and tired. But nowadays the technology is a lot better, and if you want to do it all winter, you definitely can.
So I mean, it's still better, obviously, to just have a bathing suit on and go surfing old school style, right? I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, once you get a taste of the tropics and just surfing and board shorts and nothing else, I mean, it's a whole different experience.
All right, I've decided I have to get away now. I'm in need of a vacation here. I think I'll start booking during the next commercial. Again, Mike Morris, he's the chairman of Storm Surge. He was a great guest last time. One thing we talked about a lot last time, and it's kind of nice to come back around to it here because we're, I think, at the end of the winter. Is winter almost over? Can you tell me that? Is that something you can tell me with your expertise?
Well, yeah, they said it was over, right? Didn't spring officially start?
Yes, so that means nothing, though.
The weather, it's all up to the weather patterns, right?
Yeah. And you remember the big April 1st storms, and there's been a few big April storms over the years, haven't there?
Yeah, I've certainly witnessed at least 2 of them. There maybe have been more. I think we're going to probably miss a big one this time. For a while there, the weather models were sort of honing in on a storm being here for April 1st, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Opening day's Thursday for the Sox. It's time to be done with this, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think everybody agrees.
So let's ask a little bit, though. Nobody knows Plum Island better than you do, and it seemed like every big storm, again, I mean, the coastlines were the kind of the centerpieces of a lot of these storms over the winter. Not just up here. I mean, you're talking Quincy and all the South Shore communities there that tend to get hit. Marshfield, all those communities were really getting crushed. Plum Island, I remember we sent a reporter for WBZ up here, and at one point we were scared she wasn't going to be able to get across this bridge and might get stuck somewhere.
Right.
It was pretty dramatic on Plum Island there for a while. Sure. How'd it hold up?
Generally speaking, the island held up well, right?
Yeah.
And Salisbury Beach, too. I mean, there was obviously washover, and we had sand being pushed from the beach between houses and down into the streets and things like that. So it was pretty dramatic looking if you've never experienced it before. So there was some overwash and stuff going on. And then, of course, with the high tides plus the storm surge brought in by the storm, Merrimack River backed up, and we had flooding across the marshes, which impacted properties along Water Street in Newburyport, and of course, overran the Plum Island Turnpike. So Plum Island was definitely an island there for a while. Some of the other impacts that were kind of interesting to observe was that when you get all that hydraulic pressure of all that water surrounding the island, it permeates the island underneath, and whatever groundwater is sitting under Plum Island gets forced to the surface in response to that hydraulic pressure from the ocean water.
Huh.
And so you found ponding of water between dunes and in streets where people are like, it's like a pond here. It's a lake. It's not going away,
Wow, that's weird.
Yeah, so over time, that will impact things, I think. You know, it sort of destabilizes the geology underneath the island to an extent, and certainly is going to have an impact on that water sewer system and all those pipes. You know, you get this stuff moving around.
Yeah, I was thinking that's probably a bad combination.
Yeah, so you know, it's not easy, but overall, you know, they survived well.
Yeah, I always, you know, I don't laugh obviously because it's a very serious situation, but I do. There's something. If I heard, and I'm living on Plum Island, and I heard a lot this winter, there is a suggested evacuation, or I forget the exact terminology.
Right.
It wasn't a mandatory evacuation, but the official suggests you leave. I always thought to myself, I think I would leave.
Yeah, I mean, that would have been the smart thing to do, right? I
Yeah.
mean, to be, you know, especially if you're somebody who's vulnerable. Let's say you
Yeah.
have a health condition or something like that. You know, would you want to be trapped out on a barrier beach without power, possibly, and not have anybody be able to access you because the roadway's flooded? Just not a great place to be. And a lot of times, and it didn't happen on Plum Island, but a lot of times, I mean, we saw this though during Hurricane Sandy, where a major fire broke out in the middle of the hurricane,
Yeah.
and all the roads were flooded, and despite all the rain and wind and everything that was going on, it was a raging blaze that burned down a whole neighborhood. But, you know,
Yeah.
it seems like when it goes bad, it really goes bad.
Yeah.
You know? So why put yourself in that position if you have other options?
Yeah, I mean, and you're legitimately trapped too. I don't think people who don't live here, maybe aren't familiar with Plum Island, maybe don't realize that. I mean, if there's nothing you can, I mean, I don't know, maybe you could take a boat out there, but that's also putting crews in jeopardy. But
Well, yeah, I mean, nobody's going to take a boat out in the middle of a storm.
Yeah.
Plus, you know, there's a lot of debris floating around. I don't know if you saw all the trees and stuff that were coming down the river. It's just, and that's why I think they issued the voluntary evacuation orders, because basically emergency personnel are like, hey, we're not going to put ourselves at risk at the height of a storm to rescue you, and we also gave you fair warning that that was going to be the situation.
Right.
So that certainly happened during Sandy. I mean, that's what the police departments and fire departments did down there. They said, hey, we want you to leave, because when it gets going, there's not going to be anybody that's going to come out if you call us.
yeah, it's amazing. They say now down there too, after Sandy, everybody, it was one of those things you kind of only have to learn once. It seems like every voluntary evacuation order they give, they have very high percentages of people who take that to heart and get out of there. Do you find, do most people get off of Plum Island?
I don't
during
know.
those? You're not
You know,
sure?
personally,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not down there living there anymore. So,
Yeah.
I mean, certainly a lot of people do stay, you
Yeah.
know, and some people do leave. But
Yeah, what was the most unique thing about this winter as far as this batch of storms? Because it did feel like we kind of got hit with a few of them. I mean, early March brought 3 right away.
Yep.
I think maybe in 1, 2, 3 in order was maybe the worst, most severe.
Sure.
The last one didn't quite hit, but
yeah, so there was this big event, meteorologically speaking, up in the Arctic called sudden stratospheric warming. And so basically what happens, you know, you've got that polar vortex, which is essentially the jet stream running around the top of the globe in a counterclockwise fashion. And that thing gets little bumps and waves in it, and you'll get outbreaks of cold when one of those dips hangs down over the U.S. or the East Coast.
Yep.
And it'll typically spawn a storm, and then that storm rides the jet stream up into the Arctic, and then the jet stream smooths out again. And that's kind of the normal pattern of things, right? But we got stuck in a pattern, because what happened was we had a lot of big storms out of the Atlantic that pushed a whole lot of warm air up towards the Arctic.
Yep.
And it started to disrupt the jet stream and some of the other weather patterns. And so some of the air up in the stratosphere, which actually rotates in a different direction, started to dip down into the troposphere, which is the layer of atmosphere that we live in, and our weather resides. And we had reversals of flow. So we had, instead of predominantly westerly winds north of us, they were coming in from the east. Okay. And that happened because basically that polar vortex split into 2, and we had a vortex over sort of Europe, north of Europe, I should say, and then north of us. Okay. And it caused a big kink in the jet stream over the eastern part of the United States.
Kink in the jet stream.
Yeah, so a major dip that went deep south. I don't know if you remember, but back in February, before we had the string of storms, remember that 80-degree day we had here?
Yeah.
So we were on the warm side of the jet stream.
Yep.
People who were on the other side of that jet stream were really cold. And then the jet kind of just moved a little further east, and
Yep.
then we were on the cold side, but it set itself up such that storms would just run right along it.
Yep.
And so this weather pattern got locked. And so any disturbance that came in off of the Pacific Ocean, joined up with the jet stream and formed into a significant storm.
And it just slides
off
through.
the East Coast.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, and so that that's one of the attributes of a warming climate.
Yeah.
Is that the jet stream gets really undulated and fixed in positions, and so that's why you'll have. You can have, for example, a summer here where you have hardly any rain. So it's almost a drought. We've had a couple of those in a row. And conversely, it can also set up so that you just have a ton of rain, too.
Yeah.
And so that's why you see places like Southern California getting, really dry.
There's
And
wildfires.
Some of the winters in Alaska have been really warm. And
Yep.
it's just the jet stream kind of gets locked in a position, and you get this prolonged period of weather.
Yeah.
And the weird thing here in New England is, we can have prolonged cold, prolonged warmth, prolonged wet, prolonged dry.
Yeah.
And so we can see it all.
Yeah.
Makes it kind of tough on the ecology, right? I mean, things living outside. I mean, look at my rhododendrons. I mean, they, in response to that 80-degree day, they started, hey, it's spring, right?
Yeah.
Then they got whacked with all this cold weather, and they look like heck.
Yeah.
And
People were bringing out the golf clubs too, and those never got any use.
yeah. I almost put my snowblower away back when it was 80.
Yeah. So you do have those long stretches, and then you also have those strange days where one odd thing pops up, and then the next day, even the next day, I think after that, it was right back to winter. It seemed it was.
Yeah. Once that jet moved a little further east and allowed that cold air to spill down.
Yeah. Crazy. What you just you mentioned the jet stream and coming off the Pacific too, and you mentioned the dry weather that California's been having. That's been a real storyline of the last few months. There was months ago it was the wildfires, and now it seems to be these mudslides that are. I mean, those seems to be. I've never experienced those myself out there, but they seem incredibly dangerous.
So you get prolonged drought, you kill all the vegetation, right?
Yeah.
And so what's holding all of the soil together is now dead, and then you throw in an abnormal amount of rain, and everything just starts sliding away. That's the sort of the schizophrenic nature of the weather.
You're a big traveler. You ever been through one of those, or?
Through a mudslide?
Yeah. Ever happened to stumble upon a mudslide?
I've never stumbled upon a mudslide, but it's pretty crazy when you look at the size of the rocks that are rolling and flowing as if it's just liquid water.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like it's just kind of soft liquid water, right? But really, it's boulders and trees and everything mixed in. It's fairly violent.
Yeah. I can imagine everybody who tells me they've either seen one from a distance. It's amazing, and the noise too. They always say the noise is underestimated just because of that reason. It
makes you feel small, feel like an ant.
Yeah, absolutely. And those wildfires too, they were crazy. Some of the videos that came out of that of people literally trying to drive out of wildfires.
Scary.
I guess you can't imagine how quickly they can get on you.
Yeah.
But they do.
And then they start to create their own, weather and winds and things too. Once you get that much heat energy going.
You know what everybody mentions out there that I don't think people who live here maybe always understand? The Santa Ana winds. Mm-hmm. What exactly are those?
Well, it's basically a hot wind that blows in from. It's an easterly wind, which is kind of uncommon, really, on the West Coast. But they do get the Santa Ana winds, and part of what makes them dangerous is that when those winds, which are already fairly dry and warm, traverse the Rocky Mountains and come down, that subsidence heats and dries the air even more, which raises the whole fire danger.
Interesting. So we don't. is it the mountain effect that leads to that, or the Rocky Mountains? I mean, do we have anything similar here, or is it just a complete?
No,
Yeah.
we don't really have that here. And I haven't really studied the Santa Ana winds, and I've certainly learned about it at one time, but that's not something I really know that well. I know that if they essentially get a high pressure system stuck, let's say a little bit to the north of California, the counterclockwise winds. The clockwise winds rotating around the high will induce those Santa Ana winds.
Crazy. And, then bringing it back to some of the storms that we've had here, very busy March and busy winter in general. It seemed like the power outage problem just became. I mean, I think Newburyport was out. Probably that first storm was the worst on the power outage front. Second one I think was bad too, actually. But those winds came in and just all those trees, power lines.
It was a combination of things. I think back and I talk to people my age. And we never really used to lose power not for very long when I was a kid. And even the storm of '78, we had power through all of that.
Really?
Despite all the
I didn't realize that.
I mean, certainly places lost power, but we didn't in Newburyport. But I do know that in the last 10 or 12 years, power outages are fairly frequent as a result of trees and power lines. And certainly in West Newbury, where I live, it's pretty wooded there. And despite all the tree trimming and stuff that National Grid has done, we were still without power for almost 3 days.
Yeah.
And I kind of saw that coming. I mean, back in 2007, I lost power 2 years in a row, and it was always in February or March. And the power didn't come on for 4 days, and you're watching the house get colder and colder and colder. And finally I decided I'd go out and get a generator, and an electrician, and get it all set up with its own panel and stuff. And so, I mean, it's just a basic system. It doesn't run the entire house, but it keeps the heat on, lets me watch TV if there is television, and maybe computer and internet and refrigerator and that kind of stuff. I can still cook on the grill,
Yeah.
So you don't have to go buy a $10,000, diesel-powered generator. You can get one for couple $1,000.
Probably.
I bought a Honda. It was kind of expensive, but a quiet generator makes all the difference in the world.
You can still sleep, right?
Yeah.
And it's so much better. Every single winter, you hear these stories of people who do lose power and try to heat the house with, different means, and so many times that leads to disasters.
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand. I mean, storms are going to become more frequent. Stalled weather patterns are going to become more frequent, and we could have one of those winters where it's just nice all winter, right?
Yeah.
And then we can have another one where we have a pattern like we did in March, right?
Yeah.
And not all of those storms nailed us, but what if 4 or 5 did instead of just a couple, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this last one was a little bit of a dud.
And that was looking like a bigger one for a while.
Yeah. So, you have to make yourself, I think, resilient. You got to realize that, okay, they're not going to address the grid issue in any time soon.
Yep.
So if power outages are a thing and you're afraid of your pipes freezing in the wintertime, maybe you need to think about a generator and some of the other things, to kind of keep your life going.
Now, you said you saw the 78 storm thing. I didn't realize that power outages were not necessarily a monster storyline. I mean, you mentioned, of course, there were, but power outages. But I guess I just kind of pictured everybody was in the dark, not living through it. And you said you saw more power outages coming. Now, what exactly led you to think that more power outages were becoming? Was it a change in the grid? Was it
No, I think I think the susceptibility is that the weather's worse.
It's simply a weather thing. Gotcha.
Yeah. I mean, if you get like the reason we had all the power outages that we did is we had really heavy wet snow and strong winds.
Yeah.
And prior to that, we had significant warm spell where the frost came out of the ground.
Yep.
And the ground was a little soggy, and so the trees standing in soggy ground loaded up with snow and wind are just not going to be able to handle that. They're going to topple. So, I think, if you start seeing more and more storms with near hurricane force winds combined with heavy snow and precipitation, I mean, it's just a recipe for power outages until there's a concerted effort to put utilities under the ground. Power's just going to go out because trees are going to come down, wires are going to come down. I mean, telephone poles get blown over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's that first storm was really bad where I lived in Danvers, and I was thinking that was kind of my first big, maybe not my first big winter storm. We had a couple other ones, but since I got this house and we were around a lot of trees, and I was thinking, I don't think there's anything more disconcerting than having the sound of you can hear the actual cracking, is that the one right next to the house? Or,
yeah, I mean, I took a bunch of trees down around my house because I think it was 2009 or 10. There was a pretty strong storm in March. Where there was a 90-mile-an-hour gust recorded at the Isle of Shoals, and
wow,
it took all the power went out, and it leveled a whole bunch of trees everywhere around here. Like up on Old Town Hill, a whole bunch of pine trees came down. So at my house, I had 2 tall pines, and one of them was going to come down on the house, but what had happened was another tree fell down and went down along the trunk of that tree and landed on the root ball.
Wow.
So when that tree started to fall towards the house, it was actually still being held up by the other tree laying on top of its roots.
Wow.
And so I was like, okay, call in the tree service, and let's look at what is a threat, right, and take those down. And leave the others, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think you may remember in that tree removal service. That's quite the project as well. You may remember I told you we had a tornado last summer on the 4th of July up in Maine, and they came in and a couple trees came down. Those big Maine pine trees that are however hundreds of years old or whatever. And they not only did they take those away, but they said that one's gonna go, that one's gonna go, and that one's gonna go too. Oh, really? Those look fine. They are not fine.
I mean, there's still a lot of stuff that's hanging around. Like you don't see it so much driving, but I've been taking my dog for a walk and walking down streets, and when you're moving slowly, you can observe things a little bit better.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of stuff, trees that are kind of halfway fallen over, but they haven't fallen all the way, and they're leaning towards wires, but they're not on them, so they haven't been addressed.
Yeah.
Big branches that are still hanging in the trees, but they're broken.
Yep.
There's a lot still out there that needs to be cleaned up.
I feel like every day there's one of these post-storm situations, especially I find a lot of the towns that maybe have their own power, not the national grid or whatever. Like suddenly you'll see on the power map, the whole town is out of power. I think, I want to say Abington maybe in the last day or two, but just a tree was standing, and then suddenly a tree was not standing, and it came down and took down everything with it. And suddenly people are waking up in the morning without power, and that's several days after the storm, which is...
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of these coastal communities, I mean, planners and city officials need to start thinking about microgrids, right?
Yeah.
And by a microgrid is what you do is you divide up the city into sections, and you have, maybe there's a part of the city where solar panels work really well because it's the way the houses are situated or whatever, and if you can have, battery backup, where the solar energy is being poured into the grid, but also into these batteries. And so when you get a power outage and the central power goes down, feeding the towns, these smaller microgrids can exist on battery power for some time. And decentralizing power distribution is really kind of the way to go to make yourself more resilient. In Puerto Rico, they're actually looking at that sort of thing. Instead of having these giant power lines traipsing across the mountains in Puerto Rico, sticking high up in the air, susceptible to hurricane winds, they're saying, well, why should we, build all these towers and power lines when we can just power this town where it is?
Right.
By developing a microgrid using solar panels, wind energy, and whatever, have battery backup and so forth.
Where they're still not back. Not everybody's even back yet in Puerto Rico.
I have a friend who has a house down there, and he went down to do some surfing, and he's basically camping.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's camping in his house.
That's unbelievable. I mean, you think of that. When did that hurricane hit? That was...
It was August or September, right?
Yeah, I mean late summer. Because now you're talking about the next hurricane season.
Yeah.
Or I think it begins right away, almost in the near future here.
I think that's what most people don't realize is that we lost power for 2 or 3 days and everything's kind of back to normal, right? So that storm that caused all of that. I mean, what we experienced from that storm was 25% of how bad it could have been.
We're talking about the first winter storm of March.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Because It was a powerful storm. It was slow moving.
Yep.
It covered a huge area. I mean, over the Atlantic, it was probably 700 to 900 miles across, so a huge wind field. But to our benefit, that storm was slowly moving east. Now, with one of the fears that we have with these jet streams that get all wavy and kinked up and stalled, is that instead of a storm like that moving east, it actually starts moving west or northwest and backs into us. A situation like that would create a whole lot more in the way of problems. I mean, you'd have a much higher storm surge, much bigger waves because it's pushing the entire ocean with it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the winds would be getting more intense and not less intense like we had with that storm.
25%? You think that was only about 25% of what it could have been?
Yeah.
I can't imagine, because it was pretty ugly here.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't actually here on Plum Island, but the pictures were incredible.
Yeah.
Situate, Marshfield, some of that stuff looked out of worldly, just.
Yeah. And so think of this, if you have a storm like that back in off the ocean, I mean, you're talking massive power outages, not just the shoreline communities, along the coast like we had, but you would have power outages extending well inland. And so when how many were without power? 500,000 or something like that?
Something like that. It was a monster number.
Well, what if you had 2 million without power?
Yeah.
How quickly can crews from outside of this area respond to that? Hey, they got to first get here and get through, cleared roads and whatnot. So the point I guess I'm trying to make is look at Puerto Rico as an example of how slow it can be to recovery. And picture your life maybe without power for not 3 days, but maybe 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, that's realistically what happened with Hurricane Sandy. There were people without power who didn't lose their houses altogether, but people who just didn't have power for 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Now that's kind of okay if it's August, right? Because you can deal with,
I don't know. I can't charge my phone.
Yeah, but at least you can live and not have hypothermia.
You're right.
But in February or March, you can't live without power for 3 or 4 weeks and heat. You have to go somewhere else.
It is incredible. I mean, I joke about it, but you live 48 hours without power, and you think around here it feels like a terrible 48 hours. But then you picture doing it for months and months, like they're doing in Puerto Rico. It's sad, but it's.
Well, think about just the economic impacts. I mean, I own a small business. Every time my business isn't open for business because of a storm, there's overhead and everything that accrues there, whether I'm there or not, with the lights on or off, right? And, you can be accruing a deficit of a couple $1,000s a day every time that happens. And do that, 5 times a month, all of a sudden you're in the hole $10,000. Where's that going to come from?
Unbelievable.
And that's not consecutive days. That's just days interrupted, canceled appointments because people are all focused on a storm. And
so a power outage like that in Puerto Rico is essentially a full economic rebuild needed, really. I mean, all those businesses so many of them got wiped out anyway physically by the actual storms. But I mean, they're going to be, I think they've already started, pleading for tourism dollars. And
we didn't go to Puerto Rico this year because we knew there wasn't anything to go to. Right.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of the other Caribbean islands were affected. St. Martin, they're just kind of barely getting on their feet. I spoke with a friend of mine down there. So we flew all the way east to Barbados because that island was untouched. These storms formed after that passed by. It's
got to be a whole different way of life living on those small islands, though, when hurricane season hits. And
well, it's like watching bowling balls coming at you, right? Here comes this bowling ball. Is it going to be a strike or is it going to be a gutter ball? Right?
You being the pins, yes. As you mentioned.
And it's hit and miss. I mean, the islands are fairly small, so for a storm to actually hit any individual island, the likelihood isn't that great, but they're right in the bowling alley, if you will.
Gotcha. All right, let's take a quick break. We're joined here by Mike Morris. He's the chairman of Storm Surge. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get back. I know I'm sure he's very busy with that. We'll take a look at what he's got planned. He's also a member of the Newburyport Flood Resiliency Committee. So obviously, as we kind of hopefully wrap up the winter and the storm season, I guess I shouldn't say that because there could still be one left, but hopefully not. Spring has arrived, and let's start looking towards better weather. We will see. But we'll come back. We'll talk more with Mike Morris in just a moment. We got Lily Doucette, radio producer, here today. Sarah Hayden is taking over the TV production today. So thank you, Sarah. In for David Kramer, who is getting a much-needed, well-deserved vacation. More Afternoon Drive when we get back. My name is Drew Moholland. Keep it here, Joppa Radio.
You're the one who frightened me, though I loved you from the start. I was wrong to think that you weren't right for me. I didn't mean to break your heart, but you were the one who didn't chase me down. How'd you miss that part? Were you so sure that I would stay around? So sure you let go my heart. I'm not afraid of true love anymore. I hope it comes around again. And if ever you come to my door, I'll be sure to let you in.
All right, welcome on back to Afternoon Drive here on Joppa Radio. My name is Drew Moholland, joined by Mike Morris, the chairman of Storm Surge, a very popular group around here, and he's also a member of the Newburyport Flood Resiliency Committee. We were just talking off the air, Mike, and about meteorologists, and we happen to know a couple of mutual ones and have worked with them. But one thing that I will tell people that people don't realize, it's funny when you're a meteorologist and you miss, I guess, a storm. I guess that's the best way to say it. But the last storm there did not hit like we thought it was going to. People literally get angry at the meteorologists. These people don't know what they're talking about. They're never right. I want a job where I can be wrong, half the time.
Yeah.
And it is an inexact science, the whole weather thing. You're literally trying to predict the future, so not the easiest thing to do in the world. But one thing that I have said behind the scenes is these people, the meteorologists, really do take it seriously. They'll joke with you on Twitter and stuff, but they get very upset when they miss these storms.
Sure.
I remember talking to Danielle Niles the day afterwards, and she was just walked in and goes, "Oh, I can't believe it. I can't believe that storm stalled."
Yeah.
It's amazing. They take it to heart. I don't know if the average Joe realizes that, but
yeah, I mean, it's a difficult science. I mean, I don't know, living along the river here, I mean, if you look down in a stream, right, you see all these little swirls and eddies.
Yep.
Well, try imagine predicting where one of those eddies is going to go
Yeah.
and what it's going to do when it gets there. I mean, that's basically what meteorologists are trying to do. They're looking at these swirls in the atmosphere and predicting where they're going to travel and what they're going to do when they arrive. You
Yep.
know? And then there are so many variables that feed into forecasts, and a lot of it's guided by computer models now because they can just handle so much more data and process it quicker than the human mind can. And you look at the model like the Euro. I mean, it's so big and it takes in so much data from all over the world that they can only run it twice a day because it takes that much computing power for it to run through its processes
Yeah.
and come up with a forecast. So, I mean, is the weather forecast a lot better than it was when we were younger? It sure is. It's much more accurate.
Yeah.
I think what confounded people or meteorologists on the last storm was there was a certain amount of dry air that found its way into the northern part of the storm and literally evaporated the moisture before
Yeah.
it even made it to the ground, and so we didn't get any snow. But an interesting thing, I was down in Barbados. I thought I
Good
was
place to
actually
watch that storm from.
Missing a storm, but as far as total snowfall went, anyway. But I saw one of the models showing 3 inches. And I'm like, wow, that's a real outlier compared to the others. But that one,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, all the models are, they have their nuances. Sometimes one's better than another in a given situation, but they're so complicated, it's hard to figure out which one is going to be better or not.
Right. Even so, I mean, we were people that didn't get snow and had a normal drive to work or wherever they were going that day.
Yeah.
It certainly still, it wasn't like there wasn't a storm. Ask those people in
Yeah, it was-
Situate and Marshfield.
Yeah,
if,
it was windy.
Yeah, it was
for sure.
and I mean,
that was still going on.
and there was water. I mean, it is amazing to me on the. I know it happens here too, but just on that particular storm, Situate and Marshfield, and a lot of those communities, South Shore, were really getting hit, and just how that water just surges over the walls and just.
Yeah, Situate's an interesting case study, really. Because we talk about coastal adaptation, right? So, sea levels rising and barrier beaches on which communities are built, they want to move in response to that rising ocean, except we have house lots that are defined to certain GPS coordinates and they don't want to move, right?
Yeah.
But geology and nature will win out, and so
Over time, right?
over time.
Yeah.
So what's happened in Situate? I mean, Situate, the barrier beaches down there were relatively low lying compared to what we have up here on Plum Island, and early on, and I don't remember when exactly they built their seawall on North Beach down there, but there used to be a sandy beach in front of that seawall. And they started, seeing some overwash, and they built that seawall. And what happened in response to building that wall is that the waves reflected off that wall and drove that sandy beach offshore into the currents, and that sand got transported somewhere else. So what they have down there now is a beach that's only a beach when it's low tide. At high tide, there's not much of a beach. So it's just one of the things that people need to consider when they're going to adapt to sea level rise, that if they decide that they're going to build a seawall, they can pretty much say goodbye to the beach for which they are there for, right? I mean, you own a house on
Yeah.
Plum Island or Salisbury because of the beach, right?
Yep.
Not because you're packed in with houses one on top of the other.
Yeah.
So if you destroy the beach in the process of protecting your houses, then what have you done with the resource that had ultimately brought you there?
Yeah.
Right. It's I think it's fine if that's what the community wants. If everybody decides that's okay, but I think it's kind of unfair to other people who live in this area, who have a much more difficult access to that shore, to maybe have that resource disappear.
That's interesting to think about. Yeah, you don't usually think about that, do you? when you're putting up a seawall.
It's happened in North Beach and Hampton too. That I mean, even when I was a lifeguard at Hampton Beach back in my college days, there was still sandy beach at North Beach on at Hampton. But my son, who's a lifeguard up there now, high tide, there's no beach. You got to sit on the seawall up by the sidewalk.
Wow.
because the waves reflect off the wall. It pushes the sand back offshore, and then you've got currents out there, and the sand goes somewhere else.
Crazy. You know, I remember talking about when I first started working in Boston. I remember talking with one of the new meteorologists who had just come in, I think from Indianapolis. I remember she was a Colts fan, and we just mentioned the name Barry Burbank, who's a great guy for WBC TV in Boston. And I remember she was telling me, you know, I studied this stuff for years. I got it, but there is something unique about the New England winds and the New England patterns that she said she gave Barry a bunch of credit for kind of look for this when this sort of storm comes in, because so many times I've seen it go this way, that sort of thing. Yep. And just the uniqueness of New England weather patterns, which I know you touched on a little bit earlier, you know, certain long spells and the unpredictability of it. It is unique living here, isn't it?
It is unique because, you know, we're far enough north where we can tap into that cold, dry Canadian air, right? And the Gulf Stream's not that far offshore. So just that alone, without any jet stream influence, those contrasts in temperature and relative humidity are some of the fuels for a big storm. Yeah, some of the ingredients. So, yeah, I mean, New England has seen big storms, and I think we'll continue to see more.
Not this year, though, right?
I can't answer that question. I don't think anybody can answer that. It's,
what was the big April? I remember in April 1st, like literally April 1st, that day, right? It was like, I was young, but there was a big storm where we got at least a good foot of snow or something.
Yeah, I know there was
mid-90s
back in like 98.
Yeah, okay.
I want to say it was 1998. I remember it because I had to plow. My business was located in a different location. I had this really long driveway. And it was 3 feet of cement snow. Yep. You know, and I had a Jeep Wrangler, and it just couldn't move it. You know, and I knew from plowing before that I'd have to plow a number of times during the storm to keep up with it, and I just kept getting stuck. Equipment kept breaking. And I know there was another April Fool's storm prior to that. Yeah. I was probably in my 20s when that one happened, but I don't remember the exact
that one, which the 90s one. My memory of that storm is my dad, who not the biggest fan of winter, much more. He likes to play his golf, so summertime guy. But I remember him immediately looking for condos in Florida. And, a big discussion between my mother and my father during that storm. Said, "I'm done with this. We're getting out." But yeah, it's hopefully we're out of that. Out of that little flurry.
Well, eventually get out of it. I mean, we'll continue to have storms. It's hard to say what the intensities might be, but these extratropical low pressure systems that are basically what we know as northeasters, I mean, they can persist all the way into the month of June.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what does that mean for summertime storms? Because just because the winter storms stop, the summertime storms can be unique on their own.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we get a breather. Once we get into June and July, I mean, we're going to be dominated. The jet stream will retreat further north, so the extratropical systems just won't really form. Yep. But then we'll be more susceptible to whatever starts coming out of the tropics at that point. But I think really the big time, the times to worry, I usually find in the fall, right? Because you have a transition in seasons, and you start to get significant cooling at the North Pole, and you start getting some cold air starting to move south, and you still have pretty hot, warm waters and warm temperatures, and plus maybe even a dying tropical storm that can infuse a bunch of energy into a developing, low pressure system. I mean, perfect storm was a scenario like that where a low pressure system gobbled up a.
Was that a fall? Was the perfect storm fall?
Yeah, that was in late October.
Yeah, out of Gloucester. That.
And I always remember, when I did a lot more surfing here than I do now, fall was always the time. When you really had quite a lot of surf quite often, and for that to be true, you needed to have storms.
What a life for the fishermen. They got to be constantly watching that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Around here, it's a very relevant question.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes it doesn't even have to be a storm. It's just got to be windy.
Yeah. Oh, crazy. So I guess any more trips planned here, or one quick thing? You talked about going to Barbados. You mentioned some of the weather across the pond. What happened in Britain? We had like snowstorms in Britain that were crazy this season.
Yeah. So when we had that sudden stratospheric warming and that polar vortex basically split into two smaller vortices, we had one cold vortex over the United States, and the other one was over Europe. So yeah, they got really cold and snowy over there.
They don't handle that well.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it was really, it's kind of bizarre when you look at it. You know, you look at the temperatures on the North Pole where it's completely dark, 24 hours, and the temperature is at the freezing point or above.
Yikes.
I mean, that's just kind of bizarre.
When you start canceling soccer matches in Britain, it's real serious business.
Yeah,
Crazy.
for sure.
So what's the so you just got back from Barbados? I know you spent some time with your son. That was spring break, you said, for him?
Yep.
Nice little way to get away.
Yeah,
Very good.
Yeah, we were able to go down with my wife, my son, and a friend of his, and never been to Barbados before. It's an interesting island, lots of small, bumpy roads, easy to get lost, no signs, and you really can't get around without a phone and using the GPS on the phone.
Really, and all, that all works and everything. No signal problems, or
yeah, no, we seem to have service down there no matter where we were. So yeah, once we tried to do it by map and totally got turned around and ended up
like an old school map.
Yeah, an old school map. I mean, I am old school. I like having the orientation of knowing where I am relative to other things.
Oh, very good.
But yeah, my son pulled out the iPhone and said, "Okay, we're just going to put in where we want to go, and it's going to tell us."
Excellent. Yeah, that can be scary going down those roads you don't know.
It's interesting. I mean, everything was pretty accurate, but there was one trip we took. It took us down this road, and I'm sure it was the correct road, but all of a sudden the road just ended.
Yeah.
And it had been washed out, but it had been washed out for probably a year. But it wasn't in Google Maps or whatever the app was. And interestingly enough, then we had to reroute, but on the way back, it rerouted us to the other end of that washed out road. So,
yeah, that's not what you want. Well, you got there.
Yeah.
And enjoyed it. Recommend it?
Yeah, definitely. People are very friendly down there. Nice beaches. Certainly plenty of surf at all different parts of the island, depending which way the swell direction's coming.
Cool. All right. Well, warmer weather coming our way. Mike Morris, thank you so much.
Hey,
always a pleasure. Really appreciate it. This is a nice second trip, and we'll make it a third sooner rather than later if it's cool with you.
Okay.
Chairman of Storm Surge, Mike Morris. That show flies by as always. Thank you for a good Tuesday. We'll be back here Thursday, opening day Thursday. We'll talk. I know who the guest is. It might be a little baseball related leading up to the 4 o'clock Red Sox game, so we'll see. My name is Drew Moholland. This has been Afternoon Drive. Big thanks to Lily Doucette, producer, Sarah Hayden, working the TV side. We appreciate you. See you Thursday, Afternoon Drive on Joppa Radio.
All right.
It's the break of dawn on a winter's morn. It's the break of dawn on a winter's morn. It's the wild scream